Welcome to week 2 of EDCI 577, your favorite strategic assessment and evaluation course. This week, the topics we're going to be focusing on are planning and evaluation and overview of the 4 levels. But before we delve into what's in store for us in week 2, I wanted to review some of the things that happened and some of the things we learned from the readings and discussions in week 1. So, from your first discussion, the one that required that you talked about what is evaluation and comparing evaluation versus research and also providing examples on evaluation, you talked about definitions. For example, evaluation in the context of program design. What Kirkpatrick and Kirkpatrick did was that they placed evaluation as part of the overall program of process of program design. And you also learned the definition of evaluation. You also learned about formal and informal evaluation and also learned to compare evaluation versus research. Another thing that you learned this week was related to reasons to evaluate. And both Kirkpatrick and also Horton provided quite a few different reasons for you to think of when you're trying to justify your evaluation efforts. We also looked at evaluators and, for example, things like their roles, and that came from a discussion from Fitzpatrick, Sanders, and Worthen, and also Posevac. But these two authors also talked about the difference between internal and external evaluators. We also looked at different types and purposes of evaluation. So, for example, the same authors talk about different types of evaluation and, for example, depending on the perspective uses, whether evaluation is going to be formative or summative, and also from the kinds of things that evaluations focus on. So, for example, evaluations could be for needs assessments or for process or for outcomes evaluations, and both authors describe this. And last but not least, among the many other things that you learned this week was about limitations of evaluations. And Fitzpatrick, Sanders, and Worthing specifically addressed this. You also had another discussion related to placing you in this scenario of having to demonstrate your value as part of a training department. And you described the kinds of things that you would use as demonstration of your value. The interesting thing is that when you talked about how to demonstrate your value, you actually did not use Kirkpatrick and Kirkpatrick's levels, because we haven't read about those yet, but the kinds of things you mentioned could be described using those 4 levels. And the 4 levels you'll see from the readings this week are reaction, learning, behavior, and results. And although you didn't quite use the names of the levels as Kirkpatrick do, the interesting thing was that those of you who are mostly in K-12 or higher education talked about using learning as a measure of how valuable you are in your training programs, whereas those of you in corporate talked about using results as a measure of your value. Now, and this is pretty characteristic of the environments in which all of you are part of. Basically in K-12, for us, our most important thing is learning, and so we focus on that. Corporate tends to see more about return on investment and profits and that kind of thing. What we'll see for both of us in all these different worlds is that we can use all 4 levels to evaluate, and this is what the readings this week are going to start to introduce to us.